In 1991, it was Miguel Indurain's turn to make his move to the top echelon of riders. He came in second in the Vuelta a España, which in those days was a tune-up to the Tour de France in July. This would be Indurain's 7th tour, and he was ready. He'd even lost some weight, and that would help him in the climbs. And because it also increased his power-to-weight ratio, it would prove to be an even more significant advantage in the time trials.
When he started winning his tours, he came into the race a much lighter rider, but he certainly showed he could go up the climbs with the best bike riders in the world. There was no real indicator that Indurain was going to win the Tour in '91. Pedro Delgado was back in the Tour. He was the man who was looking to lead the team. Top dog was not Indurain, but he got into the breakaway with Claudio Chiappucci, a man who'd already had a reputation as an opportunist.
A stage that was to become a defining moment in Indurain's career, the 13th stage of the 1991 Tour, put the riders in the Pyrenees. Indurain managed to overtake and drop Greg LeMond, the defending champ. As the Spaniard approached the Col d'Aspin, he heard from his team car that the Italian rider Claudio Chiappucci was coming up. Indurain waited for him. Chiappucci went on to win the stage, but Indurain finished only 1 second back. And on the podium, he found himself wearing, for the first time in his career, the leader's yellow jersey. It was the beginning of Indurain's quiet dominance of the Tour de France. It was also the first of his 60 days in yellow over the next 5 years. He was to take advantage of some very special ability to be in the Maillot Jaune in Paris each year.
Well, they called him the MiG, or the missile, because of his straight riding in a time trial. A man against the watch on his own, he was superb to watch. You knew when you sat him on the bike in a time trial, nobody was going to beat him.
He knew what he had to do going into a tour. He knew he was not the great climber, but he knew he could set all the clocks back to his time in the individual time trial event. He knew exactly how to time his effort and on what days.
Miguel Indurain went on to win the 1991 Tour de France, becoming only the 4th Spaniard to achieve that distinction. '92 started auspiciously for Big Mig with a win in the Giro d'Italia. That year, the Tour de France was to begin on the northern coast of Spain in San Sebastian. In an even more auspicious and popular win, he rode away with the prologue and seemed primed for another overall victory. He took the 13th stage at Sestriere behind the Italian Claudio Chiappucci, and then through the mountains shadowed the Swiss Tony Rominger, his closest rival, maintaining his lead overall. It was classic understated Indurain. He was not a rider who liked to embarrass his opponents. He excelled in the time trials and rode strongly but conservatively in the mountains. He rarely tried to ride his enemies into the ground. It was usually enough to just edge them out. How different from an Eddie Merckx, whose nickname, the Cannibal, eloquently described his approach to competition. Indurain was ambitious but not arrogant. He was aggressive without being maniacal. He sought victories, not fanfare. The 19th stage of the '92 Tour was set in the gentle hills of the Loire Valley, a course of some 40 miles between Tours and Blois. At a pace of almost 33 miles an hour, Indurain got home in an incredible hour and 13 minutes, a time which dropped his closest rival at that moment, Greg LeMond, back 4 minutes. Added to his time trial victories in the prologue and in Luxembourg, it was Indurain's 3rd stage win of the 1992 Tour. He went on to overall victory in Paris on July 26th, his 2nd in a row.
It's amazing how the yellow jersey changes a man's mental approach to this event. It's something you never want to give up, is the Maillot Jaune. And we never thought he'd hold it for 5 years.
The next year, 1993, Indurain again won the Giro d'Italia. In the '93 Tour de France, he stayed in yellow by winning the prologue. But then he sat back in the next stages and let the sprinters, Cipollini, Nielsen, and Abdjafarov, fight it out. A mechanical failure nearly cost him the race during a time trial, but his brother and teammate Prudencio saved him.
He punctured in this time trial, and his brother was around, Prudencio, apparently gave him a wheel. He got back on the bike. He set an amazing average speed of 48 kilometers an hour for the time trial, despite the stop, and he still beat Bunyo by over 2 minutes into 2nd place. The stop probably did him a favor because he was now so full of adrenaline, he was racing even faster.
Perhaps Indurain's greatest rival was the Swiss Tony Rominger, who looked very strong indeed. He was coming off his second straight win at the Vuelta a España, and now in the Tour de France he picked up back-to-back stage wins in the Alps, with Indurain right behind him. Then, Rominger whipped Indurain in the stage 19 time trial by 42 seconds, a not inconsiderable feat given the Spaniard's previous domination of the time trial stages.
Miguel Indurain has been beaten in a time trial in the Tour de France for the first time in 3 years.
They were so evenly matched that Indurain could very rarely get rid of Rominger, and Rominger could very rarely get rid of Indurain in the big mountain stages, in the big showdowns. And unfortunately for Rominger, he never was able to get the big time trial performance on the right day. And it was really the time trial performances at the end of the day beat Rominger into second place.
Although Rominger wore Indurain down during the last week of the Tour, it was too little, too late. Miguel Indurain became only the 7th man in history to win the Tour de France 3 straight times. When we come back, Indurain does something that no one else has ever done before. The 1994 Tour began in the United Kingdom and featured 2 promising young British riders, Chris Boardman and Sean Yates. Back in France, Laurent Jalibert's Tour hopes disappeared, along with his front teeth, in a violent crash in the sprint to the finish at Armentières. He had been the leading Frenchman at that point. Indurain, riding perhaps his most controlled tour, won the Stage 9 time trial from Périgueux to Bergerac. It would be his only stage win of the whole tour.
He was like a locomotive coming down the road, and it was just like a rush of energy as he went by. He could resist in the mountains and then annihilate the climbers in the time trial. So that combination of physical attributes is very rare.
On stage 11 in the mountains, on the final climb to the finish at Oudacam, Indurain set a devastating pace and dropped most of the peloton. Only Luc Leblanc, Richard Virenque, and Marco Pantani could hang on. Tony Rominger and Claudio Chiappucci, the pre-race favorites after Indurain, could not. Leblanc eventually won the stage, but Indurain increased his lead over Rominger by 2 minutes 19 seconds. Mounting the podium in Paris on the final day of the 1994 Tour de France, Miguel Indurain, the shy farmer's son, joined an elite group in the annals of the Tour de France. Only 2 men before him had won 4 in a row, Jacques Anquetil and Eddy Merckx. At the 1995 Tour, Indurain showed a new competitive streak. As the race passed through Belgium's Ardennes forest during Stage 7, he attacked on the climb to Montteux and passed the 7-man group in the lead that included Lance Armstrong and Johan Bruneel. It was a surprising and effective move by a wily tactician. Bruneel won the stage, but Indurain added 50 seconds to his overall lead. The Spaniard's goal was to resort the overall standings going into the next day's time trial so that he could start after his rivals and thus benefit by knowing their split times. He won that time trial by a scant 12 seconds over the Danish rider Bjarne Riis, but more importantly, he gained 58 seconds over his arch foe, Tony Rominger. He also took the race leader's yellow jersey. The Alps were next. Suddenly there was a new Swiss threat to Indurain's yellow jersey. Came in the form of Alex Züller, who picked up a win on the stage to La Pagne and moved into second place overall, in the process taking 2 minutes out of Indurain's lead. After his savvy move on stage 7, Indurain blundered a bit on stage 12. It was Bastille Day. Perhaps inspired by the timing, Laurent Jalabert, France's main hope in the Tour, and his Oncé team caught Indurain and managed to isolate him. Jalabert then built a 10-minute lead and looked unstoppable. But Indurain and his Banesto teammates regrouped and stormed back. At the finish line, his deficit was only a bit over 5 seconds. The yellow jersey was safe, at least for the time being. "3 days later, tragedy struck the Tour de France. Fabio Casotelli, a young and talented rider from Italy, crashed heavily on a descent in the Pyrenees. His skull fracture was fatal. The racing spirit seemed to evaporate from the 1995 Tour. But the Tour went on. The riders persevered, and by stage 19, the Dane, Bjarne Riis, again stood second to Indurain overall. But this would be a time trial and a great chance for the quiet Spaniard to stretch his lead. And stretch it he did, outspeeding Riis by 4 minutes, 35 seconds. It would be Indurain's last Tour stage win.
Indurain was back in flying form, and he was winning the time trial and becoming the leader of the Tour. And as we proved now for the past few years, once you give a yellow jersey to Miguel, he doesn't give it back. So he was the winner in Paris again.
Miguel Indurain won the 1995 Tour and became only the 4th man to have won 5 times. That honor also belonged to Jacques Anquetil, Eddie Merckx, and Bernard Hinault, true legends of the sport. But Big Mig became the only man in the history of the Tour de France to win 5 times consecutively. When we return, the culmination of an amazing career. Was now on a quest to do what no other rider had ever done before, win the Tour 6 times. But at the start of the 1996 Tour, Miguel Indurain appeared noticeably heavier than in previous years. In the prologue, a race that had become practically his personal property, he finished 12 seconds off the pace, 7th behind stage winner Alex Züller. And he continued to lose time as the race went on. A minute to Evgeny Berzin in the Stage 8 time trial to Val d'Isère, 30 seconds to Bjarne Riis on a snowy Stage 9 up to Sestriere, and then another 2.3 minutes to Riis at Oudecom on Stage 16. But the worst was yet to come. The Tour crossed into his native country, and Stage 17 was set to finish in his hometown of Pamplona. Perhaps his concentration wavered. It would, after all, be understandable. But at the end of the day, he was over 8 minutes behind the stage winner, and now clearly out of the running. But these were his countrymen, these thousands upon thousands who lined the roads, beating on the barriers, chanting, "Miguel, Miguel, Miguel." He was their king that day, and they were his adoring subjects. Riis, who won the stage, gave his victory bouquet to Indurain, who stood, solemn and quiet, trying to smile, uncomfortable as always at the attention.
We thought Indurain will stop now. He's home. What's the point in going from the Pyrenees all the way to Paris and not have any more chance of winning the Tour de France? Indurain didn't stop. He distinguished himself, and he finished 11th in Paris, and he became a great rider because he became a great loser.
If the measure of a man is dignity in the face of adversity, then on that warm July day, Miguel Indurain confirmed forever his rightful place in the pantheon of great winners. As the year wound down, he did what he always did best. He went on to win the Olympic Time Trial Championships in Atlanta, becoming the first professional to do so in the open era. And then came his last race, his home Tour of Spain, Vuelta a España. He entered, was not competitive, and abandoned. His legs just weren't up to it. In 1997, a month before the start of the Tour de France, a race with which his name would always be linked, Miguel Indurain retired. 8 years after his last Tour win, Miguel is still instantly recognizable. He's the same tall, handsome Spaniard, perhaps if anything with a little more hair these days. He's as modest and unassuming as ever, a gracious man who just happens to be one of the greatest riders in the history of the Tour de France.
He'll be remembered as a guy that is so far the only rider to win 5 tours in a row. Indurain's going to continue to be a powerful reminder for people of how beautiful the sport of cycling is.
The modern era of the Tour de France is a testament to the wonders of innovative cycling technology. These lightweight, carbon fiber, computer-designed speed machines are constantly pushing the very boundaries of the sport. Contrast that to the Tour's early pioneers. They rode in brutal stages that could go on for over 14 hours, often on unpaved roads and on what were called safety bikes that sported nothing more than wooden rims, 2 speeds, a hard leather saddle, and maybe, if you were lucky, even a front brake. The bikes of the Tour de France today have sure come a long way since 1903. Lance Armstrong called his book, "It's Not About the Bike." But without the right bike, you will get nowhere in today's Tour de France. And to have even a shot at winning, that bike had better be a marvel of modern technology. With the dash and dazzle so prevalent in the peloton today, it's easy to forget how absolutely backbreaking the first editions of this race were, and there were no mountain stages in the first tours. During the last 20 years of the 1800s, bike design had evolved rapidly. Advances, like the safety-style double triangle frame, pneumatic tires, the bicycle chain, and even the clipless pedal, made it possible for an event like the Tour de France to be possible. In the early years of the Tour, the stages began at 3 a.m. and could last 15, 16 hours or more. Plus, the riders were independent, no team support for them.
Riders had to carry everything with them, from spare tires, spare inner tubes, spare sprockets. The early guys who rode in the Tour de France had some pretty seriously heavy machines. I mean, 40, 45, 50 pounds.
At a time when racing conditions, road surfaces, and long stages cried out for technology, riders had little to none.
In the early days, of course, the chain was the main drive, but it was inch pitch. The gaps were like this, and the big teeth were sticking through off the chain wheels. The old chains, you used to need a crane to pick them up off the floor. They were terribly heavy.
Well, the early bikes were basically all steel, but the reason for using the wooden rims was to try and help a little bit with the comfort of the machine. The machines were very rigid and heavy, and the roads in those days were abysmal. You couldn't just put a new saddle on and start the Tour de France. You had to break the saddle in for 2 or 3 months.
In the Tour's first year, 1903, the 60 young men tempted by the challenge and a taste for adventure rode sturdy but simple machines like this 1903 Bianchi. This particular bike didn't weigh a lot more than the bikes of today, perhaps 25 pounds in total, in part because there wasn't much to it. The graceful handlebar was one piece with the stem and the attached front brake, a simple rod-operated affair. The gearing on this particular bike is 44 by 16, and the pedals, hubs, and bottom bracket all feature grease ports. Riders, from the Tour's first ever winner, Maurice Guérin, to the last-placed rider, Arsène Milochot, who finished over 2.5 days later, rode on rims made from wood, enjoyed single speeds, and a simple toe clip on the pedal. For the first few years, the bicycles were very much like the race, simple and straightforward. But with the addition of the first mountain stage in 1905, when the route visited Ballon d'Alsace, and then later in 1910 and 1911, when the first crossings of the Tourmalet, Aubisque, and Galibier were made, single speeds just weren't enough for many of the riders, who ended up having to walk their bikes.
After about 7 or 8 years of the Tour de France, they started looking to bring in the first big climbs because they could operate on multiple gear ratios. But of course it was a case of choose your gear, then turn your wheel around and get the other gear.
To better conquer these new mountain stages, a simple system was developed as seen on this Gloria from the early 1920s. the rider profited from a double-sided rear wheel with a cog on each side. He could use a larger gear on the flats and then take the wheel out, turn it around, and engage a lower gear for the climbs. This Gloria with wooden rims also featured another innovation, the butterfly winged axle nut. The large flanges on the nuts helped in the removal of the nuts when turning the wheel around for the climb. In order to be self-sufficient, riders rode with a handlebar bag and/or a seat pack, carried tubes on their shoulders, and stuffed their pockets with food or just about anything that could help along the way. Often a mechanical problem ended your race whether you were the leader or not. And even though the winged wheel nuts of the day were a great help when making a wheel change, a budding Italian rider by the name of Tullio Campagnolo struggled so badly with his while racing in 1927 that he vowed to make a better system. Just 3 years later, he invented the first quick-release hub. The 1920s saw considerable innovation with the invention of the first derailleur. Yet ironically, derailleurs of any kind would not be permitted at the Tour de France for another 17 years.
Henri de Grange, who was the motivator behind the original idea to have the Tour de France, wanted everybody to have an equal chance. He didn't want technology to give one rider a chance over another. So in the early tours, if you had a problem or an incident, you had to repair it yourself. One of the stories about the early Tour de France, Eugene Christophe, he actually broke his bicycle. He was in the lead of the Tour de France at the time. He wanted to carry on, he wanted to win, but he couldn't go to the local bike shop and get it fixed. He actually had to fix it himself. He didn't win the Tour de France on that occasion.
In fact, the Tour feared technological inequality to such a degree that in 1930 they went so far as to provide riders with bikes, yellow of course, all identical. Fortunately, that only lasted 1 year. When we come back, bike technology makes some amazing leaps.
This OLN program is brought to you by